Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the forum for W-Spec. So I'm just going to share my screen. Kelly, can you see my screen okay? Great, thank you. So today we'll be talking about all things water. And it's really a follow-on from last week. You know, the connection between wastewater and water is quite common, and so there's a lot of similarities that you'll see between what we presented last week, if you were here at our presentation, and also this week. There are a few nuances which we will go through, but essentially it's the same kind of infrastructure. So we'll head straight into it. As we've discussed at all of our forums, there are the housekeeping deals with the points that you're going to get if you're a SSSI member and you'd like to request points for your CPD points, or if you're a surveyor and you can get points allocated from the Surveyors Registration Board of Victoria and so on. One of the key things to focus on, or two key things, is that the live polling. If you've been here for a little bit, you would have already experienced some of the polls that Kelly has put up, and also the live Q&A. We welcome questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to put it into the chat. The chats are being monitored, and if Kelly sees a particular question come up, then she'll prompt me to have a read of it and to respond to it. And if we can't respond to it, we'll get back to you. Sometimes things need to be taken offline, and there's always an opportunity to be in contact with us to talk about things in a broader sense. So in this session, we're going to talk about interpretations and clarifications, and what I mean by that is how we're removing some of the ambiguities, how we're changing some of the diagrams to reflect the narrative that's in the documents. This is something that a number of members from our community have requested, and it's probably a really good thing to consider that when we're getting down to that level, then it's no longer about why do we have to do this. It's about how can we make this as relevant as possible and as easy as possible to follow. And I have the other 5 forums that we've had to date. I've had a section about future proofing. This time I'm doing something a little bit different, so which will lead into our showcase next week. That's all I'll say for the moment. So I want to start with governance. We've shared this on every occasion, and it's a really important aspect, because where we're at is that we want to get certainty about the data that we're receiving. And what we're discovering is that since we've created this checklist, there's more and more organisations that are using it. We use it for our own organisation when our clients ask us to prepare data for them to submit to A-SPEC members. And it's a really great tool to use because number one, it has people thinking about what it is that's actually to be delivered. And we used this recently for a job that we were asked to quote on for a spec, for B-SPEC, but in fact, it turned out that there was over 40 asset classes that were covered in that job, from above ground and below ground assets. So by doing this exercise, we were able to have the client be clear about all the different assets that they were going to hand over. And so So this little snapshot that I've got is just an extract of that, and you can see that there's a number of different asset classes there, spanning everything from S and W to O through to R and D. So it's a really good exercise, and the intention is to include it as part of the project assessment phase for the deliverables. And the key thing is this is about asset and asset data, not just about the asset that's being handed over. So Kelly's about to launch a poll, and the question is, if you're not using this already or haven't had access to it, would this make it easier to address handover requirements? So Kelly, if you can launch that poll, that would be great, thanks. And the way that, and there's a particular document that you can access. And last week I realized that I spoke about, I'll show you on the website, and didn't actually show on the website. So this time I'm going to show you how to access it. So when you go to our website, type in proposed changes in the search box. You'll come, click on the first result. And what you'll see here is a series of documents that have been loaded up. So in these first 3 documents, they're all available without requiring a login, without requiring to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And so we've got 3 key documents there: the overarching A-SPEC document, the certification form, which is a CSV file, and the checklist. So by clicking on that, you'll be able to see before you download it what's covered in the checklist. And you can see that it spans 6 pages. And one of the things that we also focus on is on the last page to sign that off and have your client sign off on that. So we're really advocating that this be part of every capital works project, every subdivision assessment process, and it'll create some of that certainty around what is going to be delivered. Existing versus new. This is I know many of you are have been on a number of forums, and I just want to re-emphasize it again. So the intention is twofold. One is we have assets that are already existing, they're already out there in the field, that we may or may not have much data about them. And then there are the new assets. So to differentiate between the two, rather than talk about existing assets and new assets, we're going to refer to our document as, for new assets, as the DDS. So it'll be, as you can see on the right, W-Spec DDS version 2.0.6. And on the left, it's W-Spec existing. So anytime that we refer to DDS throughout this seminar and webinar, we're referring to new assets. Now, as you can see on the screen, the existing assets are aligned with the W-Spec version DDS 2.0.6. So what does this mean? It means that they are identical except for an extra column in the existing specifications. And the extra column is attached to every attribute table, and we've categorized every attribute to show whether it's a core requirement, whether it's desired but there's research required, and by the way, the research may determine that there isn't any more information available, and then there's an optional field. So what it looks like is this. So for new assets, the DDS version, we look at this fitting table, and you can see that all of those columns are fairly straightforward. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the yellow and the blue highlighting, the yellow highlighting is a way that we show the changes to documents, and we're going to talk about that shortly. And the blue is also changes, but what is going to be removed. So yellow is additions, blue is elements that are going to be removed. So getting back to the categorization of every attribute. When you have a look at the existing assets table, it's exactly the same except for that extra column. So all of the attributes are there. And the way that we've determined what is core and what is research required and what is optional is for core elements. One of my colleagues who helped or who worked through developing this aspect of it has a surveying background. So he looked at, well, what could I pick when I go out in the field? What could I see? And so essentially it's a core element is something that you can physically see when you go out in the field. Now, if you happen to go through this when you're using this particular specification, particularly for a backlog data capture or some retrospective pickup, and you find something, you know what, that's not core, George. You should reclassify that. No problem. Just please send us a note and send us an email through the contact form and we can address that. And you can see that there are other elements there that are optional. Continuing on with data governance, I want to reinforce this, and over the next couple of slides, I want to reinforce these particular points. A-SPEC has been acknowledged and agreed that there are particular elements that are to be provided in A-SPEC and to be provided by the consultants preparing the data so that the councils and water authorities receiving the data know what to expect. We know that from time to time, there are specific instances where there's been requests over and above what has been specified in the specifications. Our position, as in the GISA position, is that whoever proposes those needs to consider if that can be done as a post-processing exercise. They also need to consider the specific impact to the surveyor or the organisation collating the data and potential impact to their client. Because there is an impact. There's an impact to workflows, there's an impact to timelines, and there's an impact to profitability. And this is all part and parcel of having certainty around what there is to be captured, what there is to be delivered, and what there is to do to develop a business process. So if we look at the holistic view, whether you're servicing Greater Western Water, Colaban Water, Wannon Water, Melbourne Water, you really only need one business process. And that has a significant benefit to everybody. The other thing I want to talk about, and I've not experienced it so much with water authorities, but this is, but I do see this with councils. And there seems to be a lack of communication between organisations on sharing data. And it comes about from consultants being asked to capture other authorities' asset data. I've listed the GISA position there, and there's many more points that we could raise, but there's an inherent risk in capturing the data. And the first one is that as soon as it's captured, it's out of date. Our suggestion and strong recommendation is that if you want other authorities' data, if you haven't already communicated with them and created a data access, data sharing agreement, then look at what you need to do to be able to do that from your organization. And you can talk about things like the frequency and the certainty they have in their data. I want to talk about two parts to this element. The first part is noting deviation from design. And this comes back to creating certainty again. We know that there are variations that occur during a construction phase. There's not a problem with that. There's nothing bad or wrong about it. It just happens. And it's all about creating a solution that best fits the environment that you're dealing with. What we also know is that there's inconsistency in the way that that data is being recorded. Sometimes the asset owner's representative records it. Other times the consultant records it. What we're working on is that whatever change occurs, particularly if it's out of tolerance, so we're not talking about things that are within tolerance, but things that are out of tolerance, then we're requesting that this form be completed and specifically put in the comments field whether the change has been agreed to by the authority or not. Now, having this, our experience is that having this document along with the data that's provided will give clarity to the business unit that's responsible for validating and incorporating the new asset data into the corporation's information systems. The second part is asset recording accuracy principles. And this applies to both the existing and the DDS versions. And essentially the principles are around accuracy of data capture and the precision of data capture. So we know that there are requirements from WASA that stipulate tolerances for the difference between design and construction. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the data that you pick up at practical completion and provide to the asset owner. And what we've started doing is specifying, and we'll have a more detailed document that outlines this. But in essence, what we're talking about is horizontal accuracies of plus or minus 100 mil. Vertical, depending on the kind of infrastructure, plus or minus 30 mil. Now, we also recognize that when you're talking about invert levels, that it's dependent upon terrain, so the accuracy may need to be greater. Please communicate that, and this is a message specifically for consultants. Please communicate with the asset owner to make sure that they are clear about what you're going to deliver, and if they have any specific requirements about the accuracy because of terrain, that you come to agreement about that. And precision, what we're talking about is linear precision for measuring, say, the segment of a pipe. We go to 2 decimal places, whereas the only exception is that when we have coordinates where we go to 3 decimal places. Kelly, can you please launch the next poll? So there's going to be 2 polls now related to this. The first one is, do you agree with these principles? And it's okay to disagree. Feel, there's no problem. This isn't about, what's everyone else going to do. It's no, like, if you agree, you either agree or you don't agree. So please submit your your response. And if you don't agree, that's okay, because we're about to launch the second part. And that is, if you don't agree, what do you propose? And this is, feel free to type in some suggestions there. If you don't have any, that's fine. If you do, by all means, please place your comments here. And these polls will be live throughout today. And if you've missed something, don't hesitate to go back. Now, continuing on with data governance, there's also a conversation about spatial relationships and connectivity. And in this particular instance, I've used the same example as I did in A-SPEC last week. But essentially what we're talking about is that there's essentially no standalone features. Everything is connected to something. So in this particular case, if we have a transmitting device connected to the water main, we want to make sure that you pick that there's a water main. Now, in this instance, we've got linked feature because it may not be a water main. And we've got the linked feature ID. So when you have a look at the instrumentation asset table, it'll have those two attributes. But if we have other attributes, other types of assets, hydrants, fittings, meters, etc., they may be connected directly to pipes.
And if you could just please note the comment from Stuart Smith. Can you see the comments?
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Look, thanks, Stuart. I think it's a really valid point, and I just want to create that for everybody. So Stuart, from those of you that know Stuart, is from Melbourne Water, and his comment is that capturing other authorities' assets, the new cybersecurity requirements may make you liable if you hold other authorities' data, and particularly publicize it in your data portals. Now, I hadn't thought of that as a potential impact, but thank you, Stuart. And in fact, this morning, Kelly, Andre, and I were talking about potential speakers for next week, and that probably, and we started talking about cybersecurity. So we might be on to something there, Kelly and Andre. Graphical representation is always key for our specifications. We essentially work with 4 elements: points, lines, polygons, and text. Now, the text is often miscellaneous text, cartographic text that's there to describe maybe an offset or a chainage. And that's okay. There are no attributes required for those. But let's look at points, lines, and polygons. In this case, we've got a support block, which is on a main. And so if we look at identifying it as a point, we're going to place it somewhere in the center. However, we specify the support block as a polygon. And there's a number of reasons for that. And again, this is around certainty about the data and confidence in the asset location, particularly when you're talking dial before you dig or similar services. So if we capture it with a polygon, then what we're going to see is the extent of that polygon versus where that point is. Now, if the asset owner wants to post-process it and put a point, don't hesitate to do that. We're not saying don't do it. If you do it, we also suggest that you keep the polygon there as representative of the actual size and orientation of that particular object. And at this point, we're only talking a 2D, but as we go further and further into the 3D environment with Revit drawings and the like, then you can see, you know, length, width, and depth as well. Now, in this particular case, the final deliverable for a support block is a polygon. Now, I know I'm probably preaching converted, but I just wanted to re-emphasize the importance of having the extents of objects mapped in your systems, not preventing you or suggesting that you don't use points as part of your network environment. However, supplement it with an object that shows the full extent of that feature. Section 6 in every document outlines a summary of the specific changes. And as you can see from that, we're quite specific. We talk about, in this instance, attributes that have been removed, codes that have been removed, and which code list they're from, and so on. And we've also got lists, documented modifications that we've made throughout the document. So it's a really important document if you want to look at the changes. You can start with this. And I'll talk a little bit more about the changes in a moment. Just very briefly, I want to talk about GDA shift. This is, I know for Greater Western Water, this is one of the key projects that is being undertaken at the moment as part of their Spatial Odyssey initiative. And so from our perspective, what we've looked at is that there's a certification form within the required as part of the submissions. And the certification form lists all of the column that's under the label there. Now, if you're going to record a GDA 2020 data set, then really there's three fields that are critical. If you're going to then record ATRF, which is Australian Terrestrial Reference Frame, which relates to a dynamic datum, and to date, through our polling, we haven't seen anybody that's actually delivered data based on the dynamic datum. However, if you do start doing that, we've got these two fields, or these three fields there, that the start date of observation, the end date of observation is really critical. They're two new attributes, but you can also see the notes and the comments field at the bottom, that you can put other information in there to record your method or the kind of parameters that you apply to that particular change. Well, Kelly, did we have a poll for GDA shift just to see? Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So you may have responded to this before. That's okay. Please respond to it again, as it's specific to W-Spec. We're really keen to see if you have used any of the following datums for the delivery of data. I'd be interested to know, have we seen any responses for other, Kelly, that you can recall? No. Okay. Now, talking of changes. Last year we prepared...
We got 5 other responses today.
5 other responses. Okay. Well, the people that have put other, would you be, well, I'm guessing that one of those may be GDA 94. Of those people that have placed other, could you just put into the chat, please, what those other ones are? And my guess is they're all going to be GDA 94, but we'll wait and see. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who responded. Okay, so proposed changes document. In the past, we've created a document which just highlights the proposed changes. And we thought that this would be a good way just to see the changes. And as you can see, we use the highlights of yellow and blue. Now, we have a question for you. Would you prefer just to see the full document? So Kelly, could you please launch that next poll? A no will mean you'd like to see the cut down version. A yes is happy to see the full document, and the impact that that will have is the amount of time and effort that we need to put in to make sure that those cut down documents are available. So I'm going to put in my preferred interest is to, my vested interest is only to see the full document. So far, everybody has responded to that, and I'll be, and that's been the theme right throughout all of the forums so far. So thank you again for responding to that. Now, this particular next group of slides are requests that may have come through another forum, but are relevant to all of the specifications. And then there are some requests that may be just relevant to this forum. So let's start off with onboarding for contractors. And the question, can we distribute A-SPEC to contractors? So I'll answer the second part. The short answer is no. You can't distribute A-SPEC to contractors. So let me expand on that, and let's have a look at the onboarding and what's involved with that. So with the onboarding, as asset owners, every asset owner would have signed a non-disclosure agreement to get access to all of the documentation and the material to keep secure the intellectual property provided there, and also to ensure that there are no breaches of copyright. Now, when a contractor gets access to the has a requirement to provide A-SPEC data as part of their submission for sign-off to get their statement of compliance or clearance, we request that you refer them to us. And in simple terms, all they need to do is going back to our website, that they, at the top here next to the search box, and I know many of you have already done this, is for them to fill in this contact form. And by filling in this contact form, it'll come to our office and it'll be addressed. Now, a number of things happens. The first thing is we request that they sign a non-disclosure agreement. The second thing we do is we enter into a conversation with them about who are they going to prepare this data for, what's their capability, have they done this before? So we're trying to gauge what their needs and wants are and what may be missing for them so that they can fully comply with the asset owner's request. I've had a recent situation where a consultant sent to me a request to say, George, we've been requested by X council to provide A-SPEC data for DNR. Are they a member? And I said, actually, they're not. I said, so here are the two options. You can go back to them and say, you're not a member. As soon as you become a member, we can provide this data to you, or as you are not a member, we're not going to provide the data to you. So we're encouraging those kind of conversations to organically grow. Now, from a consultant's perspective, there's no obligation on them to provide A-SPEC data to an organization that doesn't subscribe to A-SPEC. So by checking in with the consultants, we can make sure that we actually create some clarity for them, particularly if it's their first time. And if there's some technical requirements, some training, then that often leads to training provided by Gaby through his Digital Hive entity on how to create and validate and correct A-SPEC data. Second thing that we want to talk about is making sure that all assets are within the area works extent. The intention of the area works extent has been to clearly define the assets that are being delivered project by project. So the question came about, George, or actually more of a statement, George, you really need to clarify that we need to put the boundary right around all of the assets. So I dug in a bit to find out, well, okay, how are you processing the data? And what we're seeing is that that area work extent boundary is used to then add through spatial querying to add those particular attributes of that project to each of the assets. And then the asset owner stores that. And then we started exploring, well, what happens if you get overlapping boundaries and the like, or you don't get any boundaries? Well, that's quite problematic. So we now are looking at incorporating an area works ID for that area works extent boundary. And this is what it's going to look like. So every asset table, and you can see an example of that for pressure main, where area works ID will be included. And that area works ID is the area works ID that's created for that particular boundary. So where we have those two instances that have been circled, it won't matter as much that they're outside of the boundary like that, because they will have the area works ID incorporated into them. Now, of course, if there are existing assets, we want to make sure that the existing assets are not included as part of that submission, in terms of that it can be confused that it's a new asset being provided. There's also a greater use of the AS5488 standard among water authorities than there is among councils. So we know that there's a new version that's been published this year. Gaby is on the technical committee that's looking at that, and there's constant changes to that. If you have any questions, feel free to post them, and we'll make sure that Gaby is alerted to them and responds to them. But as some of you may know, well, if you're not aware, let me deal with it that way. If you're not aware, there are 4 quality levels that AS5488 relates to, so that there is certainty around how assets have been identified. And those quality levels are A, B, C, and D. I won't go into them, but happy to for Gaby to expand on them if need be during the tech session. So just a heads up, Gaby, just get some material ready in case there's a question for you. Now, in terms of A-SPEC, as you can see on that form, the way that we're dealing with it is a roadmap. So not all of the attributes that are required for A-SPEC are actually picked up through AS5488. So we've created this roadmap in terms of, if you're going to use AS5488, 5488 as the basis of your attribute data, then you also need to consider these other attributes that we list in the table in each of the specs for D, S, and W to fully comply with D, S, and W requirements. In terms of A-SPEC, the DDS, the new attributes, that would be rated as A+. A being the highest, the highest accuracy. A-SPEC is A+ because the data is actually captured in the field by a professional authorized to do that. You'll also see in our tables that where there is a term like tap-recycled, we've actually linked that to the A-SPEC equivalent. So we'll be updating this as well. This is currently mapped to the 2013 version of 5488, but we're going to update it as part of our exercise before we publish these specifications. So our intention is that whoever is using AS5488 and they need to comply with A-SPEC, they can go to the table and they can see that if there's a term called main, then what does it relate to? And that gives them almost the pathway to delivery of the A-SPEC related data. I briefly touched on omission of existing assets from submission. We're not saying don't provide them. What we're saying is record them such that the asset owner sees that it's an existing asset. So if it is, if there's an access point that's already existing that you're connecting a pipe section to, say as part of, let's just leave it at that, that you're connecting a new pipe segment to, then you may want to prefix it with something like EX as part of the unique ID. So if the asset number is 123 and it's already existing, then the unique ID in the data set would be EX123. And there's no requirement to provide any data about that. However, you may want to consider that you could use this as a way to confirm that what's in the field is what the asset owner has in their system. So provide them the key information. If it's a pipe that's you may provide them the material and the pipe diameter. That may be sufficient to confirm it along with where its location is, particularly if there's an extension being added onto that pipe segment. Data formats. We've emphasized it in all of the other forums, and I'll emphasize it again. Currently, the most common data formats we see.
Sorry, George.
Yes.
Quick question. Are authorities providing existing asset data to consultants to tie into and to show internal asset IDs and reflect what may have been disposed during the project?
That's a good question, Brendan, and I'm happy for representatives from other authorities here to respond to that, either by taking themselves off mute or not. While they're thinking about that, or just put into the chat, while they're thinking about that, there's an opportunity within the specs for the consultant to request that, Brendan. And I would see, from my experience of having done some sewer design in a former life, we always worked on getting a full feature survey happening to then see if that married up with the authorities' data that was provided to us, particularly for an outlet. So that's my experience, Brendan. Does anybody from one of the water authorities want to say anything about that? Kylie, you're looking as though you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Yeah, my time at Barwon Water, I was in land development and we used to audit design plans. And yeah, we would bring up whatever your front end is, enlighten, profess, check what the existing assets are and make sure they match what is on the design, where they're connecting new assets into the existing assets, check your levels if it's sewer, check your pipe size and type if it's water. So that's predominantly what is done at Barwon Water. I'm assuming it's done at most authorities just to make sure, yeah, they got the right materials in the field to connect to, right sizes, things like that, so there's no surprises.
Thanks, Kylie. Great. Okay. Let us know if that's answered your question, Brendan. If you have a supplementary one, don't hesitate to post that as well. Okay, so just to complete the conversation about data formats, the most common data format that we're seeing, or there's two, Esri shapefiles and MIFMID. We're also advocating GeoPackage, and GeoPackage we're seeing is a simpler, and this is something that's advocated by OGC. GeoPackage is a simpler way to bundle up all your data rather than having a separate set of files for each asset type. When you're creating your data, the GeoPackage literally packages everything up. So when you deliver it, you're delivering one file, the asset owner opens it up, and it explodes all of the different layers for them automatically. They don't have to worry about importing one at a time. And of course, because it's more database related than the other formats, and I know Gaby will talk about this as well, then you can do some other validation checks, through the GeoPackage data set that's been provided to you. Now, I also want to acknowledge that there's the AC/DC process, which is provided by OpenSpatial. Now, the AC/DC process, as many of you know who are submitting data via that particular portal, you utilize the DWG templates, and sorry, I just got distracted by Kim's comment. Thanks for passing that on, Kim. So the AC/DC process, you have a series of DWG templates that you provide, and they go through the validation process there. However, the outputs are typically Esri shapefile, or it might go out into a geo database, or it might go out into some sort of holding database to enable the asset owner to process that data going forward. So whilst we don't see that AutoCAD is a GIS ready product, we do acknowledge that it is part of a process that's been built by OpenSpatial and a number of water authorities use. This is always a good question, and I've covered it off in a couple of slides later, which I think many of you have seen, but if you're new to it, it'll be important to show you. How can we confirm that we get the as-built data as part of the handover process? Well, there's two things. One is the checklist, and the other one is the certification form. A third one is the completing of the quality assurance document that shows what changes have occurred. Now, bottom line, it really comes back to the asset owner having processes in place to enforce that requirement, and to have a process in place to deal with the non-compliance conversation. And part of that might be that the asset owner puts a process in place so that they gain confidence in your data suppliers. So, are you doing spot audits? You probably know some of the shortcuts that consultants may take, and you probably have an idea of where to look first, by all means, our experience is people providing A-SPEC will still take the same shortcuts, and it's only through conversations about whether they comply or not comply that we'll get certainty and consistency with that deliverable. Reserved words related to databases. We know that there are particular words that are reserved. We've seen it with Esri shapefiles where we can't use the term shape. So we've used a prefix like P_shape for a pipe shape. We also know, and Gaby has created a significant or an extensive list of the kind of conflicts that occur through reserved words. Here's just a brief extract of them. And again, it may be a post-processing exercise. It's not something that we're going to approach with right now because of all the variables. It may be that it's something that we deal with in the future, but right now we see that as a post-processing exercise for the asset owner, so that when you receive the data, before you incorporate it into your system, that you map it from whatever the field is called in the A-SPEC deliverable to whatever the field you want it to be called in your corporate information system. Digital twins and digital engineering. It is, as I've outlined to everybody previously, if you've been at other forums, it's a work in progress. We will be guided by the community and essentially by the asset owners. In simple terms, digital twin is a digital representation of the physical world that, among other things, enables what-if scenarios. And we know that A-SPEC is firmly suited to a digital representation of the physical world. It's not really rocket science. What we do need to do is explore further about, the impacts of initiatives like the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy and similar strategy in New South Wales about how to be ready. How is A-SPEC going to be ready for that? From a 3D perspective and a Revit perspective, Gaby has a conversation about that in his tech session. Removal of unnecessary attributes. So from that perspective there, again, it's about, do we really need all of those attributes? And that's what I like about these community requests. There is a broad cross-section from the kind of formats that we use to how do we ensure that we get what we want to get, to, what, these don't make sense, let's remove them. If it's important to you, then please discuss it and send it through to us in our contact form. And as you can see, one of the requests was to update drawings to better reflect the requirements. So yes, so we've updated the drawings. We just cleared them up a bit, and as you can see, we've made sure that we've created the relevant A-SPEC attribute, so that when you're seeing this kind of drawing, you know which attributes to populate. We've also updated this drawing, which to reflect where the depth of a manhole structure is to be taken to. Previously, you can see on the right, it wasn't particularly clear. On the left, we've added a few more words to say that it's from the cover, as in the finished surface level on the top of the cover, to the lowest accessible point in the access point. Now that shows it to the invert level in most instances. It is there, but we also know that when there are drop pipes in structures, or some structures are deeper, then that needs to be taken into account. So we will consider adding an additional diagram to reflect that. Another request was, how do we deal with compounds? And this comes back to the question about how do we get all of the assets that are part of a particular build. Now, I've used this diagram a number of times because it's a great diagram. It had us really think about how to apply A-SPEC in this instance. As you can see, this image is courtesy of Central Coast Council. It's not just the image that was courtesy of it, it's the permission to talk about the particular project. So this project is about upgrade to a major water treatment plant. And so what you're seeing there is the LiDAR of the new infrastructure, or well, the virtual infrastructure that's going to be added in there. So we were asked, how can we apply A-SPEC to this? So we looked at it holistically. Well, what other assets are going to be built? And what we're going to focus on is this particular area here. And so what was important is, okay, if we're going to be capturing data about the water infrastructure, there's probably not a lot of infrastructure. So let's take advantage of the fact that there's other infrastructure that's going to be built there. There's other infrastructure existing. So why not look at what else we're going to do? So this little demo, and I know some of you have seen it before, really just highlights how we approach it. And out of this exercise, we also identified that there are new asset classes that we hadn't considered before. And that's the great thing about having new members come along and participate in our community, that we start seeing how it can contribute to the overall benefit of the community. So, as you can see there's a hard stand. We didn't have hard stands before we did this exercise. We didn't have other features that I'll show you in a moment, like platforms and stairs and ladders. So these are the kind of things that we look at, and it adds some robustness to the specifications to make sure that it's not just about below ground assets, it's holistically, what do we see in a precinct or a compound? So, do we have a template for the certification form? The short answer is yes. Okay, and again, if I go back to our search, and the way to access it is here. So basically, this is what it looks like. If I was just to, all right, so it's an Excel form. You can put it in as a CSV. So essentially, here are the fields that we want provided. Here's the description of what needs to go in here. And in this column here is where you put the information. So we'll tidy that up a bit more to give it headings. But essentially, we want that to now be provided in an Excel or CSV format because it's much easier to validate. And we have some members of the community who actually use this form to confirm that the details that's provided in there, that it aligns with the area works extent boundary details, about the project information, about the GDA, projection, and to make sure that the data is provided in that particular projection. So it's a useful form. This was one of the requests. It just didn't make sense, and this was identified by one of the users. the values for the unit reference just weren't appropriate. So we had a look at it, and we could see that we got confused. We created that the unit ref was a schedule, whereas in fact the unit cost field is a schedule. And what I mean by that is that if you don't want to, as a consultant, and this is aimed at consultants and also for the asset owners to take into account, the intention is that there's one or two ways to provide details about the cost of the infrastructure. If it's a linear feature, you can provide a linear meter cost, and it's dependent upon size and material and all of that sort of thing. You can do a per item cost if it's a valve or a flange or something like that. Or you could create a schedule that lists all of the different elements and all of their costs that the asset owner can use. And you as an asset owner can have a look at to see how relevant it is for your capitalization of that particular asset and compare it to the unit rates that you currently have in-house. We're particularly aware of the fact that the Auditor General's Office in Victoria requests that the cost of the asset installed at the time is the cost to be provided, not the replacement cost. Now, I also know that many organisations have their own unit rates, and they use that, and that works as well. So it's really a case of this data being provided consistently from the asset owner. If it's deemed that it's not of value, then please communicate that, and we will address that and remove it from all the specs. But we see that this is an important element linking it to the financial aspect of the asset. Just before I move on, actually, let me do this. Now, John just raised a really important point, and thanks for that, John, in the chat box. The ACDC portal also accepts zip Esri shapefiles as submissions.
Yeah, actually, another quick comment there also, George, and that's with ACDC portal, doesn't need the README CSV file either.
Right. The portal doesn't, but the client does.
Yeah, but when I upload the zip file,
yep,
the ACDC portal, when it's doing its validation, it extracts or removes the CSV file. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I know they've got a good process in place to store all of the common data and apply it. Essentially, it comes out the same way. We'll have a conversation with them about the CSV. It may just be that you provide that separately, John, going forward, so it completes the submission for the client. Or but it's let's talk a bit more about that offline, rather than making a decision right now without knowing all the facts.
I can maybe jump in there, George. Yeah, we could probably just, if the CSV file is there, just make sure we zip it in the converted component in. And we, in terms of the information in the page, we're adding quite a bit of validation on the portal at the moment.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Johan. For people who don't know, Johan Nell is one of the owners and directors of Open Spatial, so straight from the horse's mouth. Okay, new asset classes. This version of the updates across all of the specs, we've had some minor changes, and we've had probably all up maybe half a dozen new asset classes. But in the context of W-Spec, we have one new asset class, and this is platforms. And this again came about from doing the project work with Central Coast Council, you know, what we really enjoyed about that was that we had 4 interns working with us at the time, and we were teaching them, you know, they all had masters from, you know, in civil engineering, environmental engineering, construction supervising fields. So what we added to that was, well, what happens after something is built? And so we had them go through all of the design drawings and align the elements of the of what was in the proposed design to A-SPEC, and that's how we came about finding that there are new assets that we hadn't got covered, and in this particular case, platforms. So we had a look at, well, could we use boardwalk? And the short answer was yes, but. And the but was, it would be confusing to all of a sudden have people look at something from an open space. So in this instance, we created a new asset class, which now exists in the in W-Spec, and you'll see that in the proposed version if you're able to download it from the website. If you can't download it from the website, please complete the contact form, and it may be that as a consultant you have a login, but we haven't given you access to it as yet. Happy to make that change. We get those requests all the time. If you haven't accessed any of the specs before, then we'll go through the process of onboarding you and having an NDA signed. As a subscribing member, and Kylie and others from Greater Western Water, you actually have subscribed to these specs. So what that means is that you can complete that contact form and request a login. So the non-disclosure agreement is already been addressed. Greater Western Water subscribes to the specs. What will happen is that when you request a login, whatever Greater Western Water has subscribed to, you will inherit those permissions. So anybody from your team, you know, Diane, Kylie, Con, Robert, if he's on, others, you can all request access, and you'll get access to all of the material that's available there as well. And I'll also show you that in the wrap-up session. Now we also see that there are stairs and ladders that come into play, so typically we find them with buildings, and so that's become a new asset class with buildings. However, going through the exercise with Central Coast Council, we also saw that we had stairs and ladders along tanks. So we don't want to replicate that within W-Spec. So it's more about understanding where you could find that asset class. And in this case, it will be part of B-Spec. So you just download that particular table requirements so you can fulfill on completing your inventory. Now you'll notice that Kelly has popped up a new poll. If you've gone through the specs and you can see that we haven't got specific assets covered, then by all means, please list them. Please let us know. Now I've got a little bit more to go before I hand over to Gaby, but just a few more slides. So I'm probably going to be about another 5 or 6 minutes, Gaby, but you'll still have half an hour at your end to deliver what you need to deliver. Okay, so primary changes. We've spoken about the Area Works ID. Also unique identifier. Unique identifier is important so that objects can be addressed. Now, previously we had asset tables that had no attributes. Now we're including two key attributes, an area work ID and the unique ID, so that those objects can be processed in a geospatial environment or even in a database environment. There's other relevant changes where we've spoken about removal of attributes and addition of attributes and so on that can be found in section 6. We've created a table for access point for polygons, and again, minimal number of attributes so that this can actually be linked to the point feature that's provided. You'll notice that there is a requirement to provide all the attributes on the point feature and provide a polygon feature as well. So this way we're linking the two together. And remember, there's spatial relationships with pipe segments and access points to make sure that you show the true alignment of the pipe, not just joining them point to point. Now, again, with our review of the Central Coast Council job, we came across baffles. Okay, so we hadn't seen baffles before, only because we hadn't dealt with this level of infrastructure before. So you can see that we've also identified the access platform with handrailing and a ladder. So there's more things to deal with. So from our perspective, what we want to start dealing with is how do we deal with baffles? So I'm going to ask you, we're going to have a little quiz. How would you classify the baffles inside this water tank? So Kelly, can you pop that quiz up, please? So whilst Kelly is popping that quiz up, not seeing it yet, Kelly. So we want you to give us your perspective of what the quiz is, of what the response is. So how would you classify the baffles inside this water tank? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to complete that. And please, everybody, I'd like everybody to complete this. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay, let's have a look at the results. What's everybody? Looks like we're
do it. Well,
we should be able to see it in the chat.
I think I need to do something.
I think you do. Well, let's deal with that in the wrap up, Kelly, so that you have a little bit more time to deal with it. But I'm interested to see what everybody came up.
And there's 14 answers.
Okay.
Some said gates, some said fences, majority said mechanical equipment, and nobody said electrical equipment.
That's good. So the first thing is it's not electrical equipment. This is what it came in as. And in this particular instance, it became a code. So we didn't need a new asset class. It became an additional value in one of the code lists. So thank you, everybody who completed that. There's lots of changes around code lists, and again, have a look in section 6. And I'll talk a bit more about the code lists in the wrap up. We're constantly looking at clarifying things. And this is across all of the specs. So I showed this last week, but essentially, if this table exists in any of the specifications, then those changes apply to each of those specifications. Gaby's going to talk in some detail about the API and the web app that Digital Hive have developed. And so, so I won't say anything more about that, other than we're continuing to harmonize and standardize our codes, and in fact, our attributes and our descriptions and the like. So just before we go on to Gaby, can you please pop this poll up, Kelly? What we'd like to know from you is what your preferred phase-in time would be, and we've given you 3 options. And I'll give you the responses during the wrap-up and summarize, now that we've completed all of our forums, what the preference is. So Tech Talk with Gaby is what's going to be covered in this session. Gaby, over to you. Thank you everybody for your time and your questions. Feel free to keep posting any questions in the chat if you think of something after the fact. So I'll go on mute now, and over to you, Gaby.
Thank you, George. And I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, Kelly, I cannot share my screen.
Give me 1 second. I don't know why that's happening. How are you logged in, Gaby?
That's okay, Gaby. I've just given you permission now. Try again.
You have. You have indeed. Okay. Just want to make sure I pick the right one. Well, right. How about now? Can everybody see my screen?
We can see a black screen, Gaby.
Is that better?
Beautiful.
Thank you. All right. So here's the stuff I was going to talk about, but there's one topic that was added during George's talk. And I don't have to talk about it, but do people want to talk about AS5488? Do you want me to have a quick discussion about that?
Only if there's a question, Gaby.
Is there anybody who wants to?
Yeah, quick question. Just I saw there's a revision or new update coming to it. Have they taken out the color scheming of all the different utilities, or is that staying there?
That's staying, but it's remember that's only a recommendation. It's not it's part of the standard. That's just a suggestion basically. So and the color scheme hasn't changed at all. I know that there's a lot of discussion about the colors in terms of paper versus on the ground. If a surveyor paints it, big differences, and also questions about difference between white and cream. So but that was it. Made what we did in the standards, we made it clear that this is about it's a proposal. The council or the client must determine their own actual color scheme. It's just suggestions. All right. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's a request for further discussions. I'll just jump through that and go back one there, and we'll talk about validating of A-SPEC data. So what we do a lot nowadays is validating data, and I know that a lot of you have been in this talk before, and it's very similar to what we had in previous ones. So apologies for the repetition. But for those who haven't heard this, the specs is very clear about the relationships between different spatial attributes. And very often people focus only on the attributes and the asset class, and they forget that that asset class has got a particular relationship with something else. And so what we've done is we've created for ourselves a just a spreadsheet with the relationships defined. And I'll just minimize that for a minute. And what we've got in there is different ways in which things relate to one another. But what we also have is sometimes those relationships aren't, that it's not an absolute relationship. Sometimes the relationship is more a case of just check something. So for instance, we've got the area of work extent, and you'll see that we've got a disjoint there in relation to other areas of work extent. Now, what it means is that two areas of work extent can overlap, probably does overlap quite often. But when they overlap, we just create a warning to say, well, let's go and check that everything is right and that the things are the way that they are supposed to be. In relation to the two areas of work extent. But for the other items in the areas of work extent, there's an inside, and it really means that things should be inside of the area of work extent. When it comes to things like meters, a meter may touch a pressure main, or it may touch a service main. So there must actually be one point that they share in common. Now you cannot say it's an absolute, because a meter may be on a pressure main, but it could also be on a service main. So that's why I've got it in two different colors, which means that those two tests work in conjunction with one another. That's just the process that we use. And the point about this is it's to encourage people to actually have a look at what the relationships are, to make sure that that you've got that covered off, and to make sure that that if there's issues there, that you address them before they go into your database. Okay, let's talk about codes. So first of all, thanks for lots of you who've submitted logins. I've created all of those, and we'll finalize in the week. At this stage, our process is manual, and it's because we want to be checking various things in the process. And so it's not an automated process, but we've completed all those requests. I'm looking at the screen, and John Cleverden, you're on there, and so you will all receive your final logins within this week. There were one or two that we created earlier on, and for those people we only provided read access. Apologies for that, but that's now been fixed. So you will have read and write access for this. So the next thing I want to talk is about the C comments. So I've said this before now, and I'll just repeat that. C comments is a very good mechanism to help you not to stall your projects, but to get the project submitted, especially if there's certain values that are unknown. It gives you a mechanism to actually deal with the value. It gives the developer, the surveyor, actually a mechanism to deal with the value in such a way that it can be addressed after submission. But it also means that this is something that should be dealt with, and we suggest that you should never have things like C comments in your database, because that's obviously relating to some code that needs to be assigned correctly, and it's only a placeholder. And so just a comment there. We see a lot of C comments in databases, and that shouldn't occur. The next thing is that I want to talk about our little code list application. So if you go to our website, you'll see that there is a link to the web app, the code list web app. There's the QR code there, and we've created a user code and a password. That user code and password will only allow you to look at the code list, but not actually you won't be able to submit any data or do anything fancy with it. So we do want to suggest that you come and have a look and sort of actually register the code list, your code list in, to register as a user for the code list app. I've shown this before. I'll show it again real quick. The code list allows you to filter things, so you can get everything from W-Spec. If you want to have a particular code, let's say you wanted to know what FCEM is, so fiber cement sheets, you can just type the code. If you don't know what that code means, if you want to know what a code for something specific is, so let's say an aluminium impeller or something, so just type in LU and you'll find the appropriate code for that. So it's just a really easy way to search. The other part is that you can copy your codes, you can create a CSV, you can create a PDF, and that's of everything that's on the screen. If your codes, if your search has several pages on the screen, then you can just drop down there and make that 100 or whatever number you want, and then you get more than just the few that that's on the screen at that moment, and you can then copy it. So easy access to the codes. If you have a code list request, so all those C comments ones, if you want to see what other people have submitted in terms of codes, then you can come over here and you can go and look and see, well, somebody submitted something about a request for what is this one? A backup power type. So that's Mike B. So that's probably Michael Balfour, I think. And so he said, no, I have a code for a backup power type, and I suggested it's MBT, and he's indicated something there. Oh, and I can see it's to indicate solar
Gaby,
or battery
can
power.
I interrupt you for a minute, please?
Yeah, go.
I'm not seeing any of that on my screen. Is anyone else seeing that?
Why didn't anybody tell me? Sorry about that, George. I'll just
I don't have
chill that. You should see it now.
Yep, can see it now. Thanks, Gaby.
Thank you, George. Oh, so all of that searching, you didn't see anything. Okay, I'll just...
It's the black box, isn't it? The black box mystery.
The black box mystery. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just go through that again. So so here is the list of codes that users have requested, and so this is not this has not been checked by George or by Gissa. So it's just users that said, I'm interested in this code, and if I look at one of those, so it will be important to go and have a look at what other people has. And so somebody is, and I think it's Michael Balfour, has said, oh, I want to have a code, and he suggested MBT, and he suggested power backup type, and he wants to use it for solar or battery power. And so in other words, so that request now becomes available to George, and George can go and have a look at it and can deal with it. And the code lists in future will become the de facto starting point for code lists. And so so that it'll be good to have that. Okay. If you are a member, if you're a registered member, then you can actually go and submit a code. Anything that's in red will be your registered name or a required field, and you can drop photos. And you can also, if you open this up on your mobile device, you can take photos in the field using that app. Okay, minimize that.
And a quick question, Gabby. BPT could also be brake pressure tank. Yes? No?
Oh, that's what I don't know. I don't actually know what BPT is, but let's go and have a look. That was a suggestion by the user. That's what the user wanted. That doesn't mean that that's the correct list. So let's go and see what BPT stands for. And I'll just clear that filter. I don't know. Well, there isn't a BPT in the code list at the moment. So Kim, you can suggest that you want to have brake pressure tank. All right. I'll move on. I'll talk about the API very quickly. I've spoken about this last year. I haven't spoken about this year. For those people who have got access to the web app, you'll also have access to the API. Now, APIs have got just a few things about APIs. It looks like gobbledygook, but if you just calm down and have a look, you'll see there's some logic to it. You can see each of these things is actually, that's the URL, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there's a key value pair. There's the key separated by an equals, and then there's some value, and that ampersand tells me there's another key value pair coming, and so forth. So the first important bit is the base URL and where it sits. Then there's an API key. The API key, if you want to use it, you'll have to request one from us, but that's part of the package, and we'll probably send an API key to those registered users. Just like in the pages, if I request something via the API, it breaks the request up into manageable chunks, and so what the next to the from and the page size gives me is from which record do you want and how many records do you want. And so I can go from record number 0 to 100, and then the next request could be from 101 to 500 or whatever you want, or you can go from 0 to 3000, and that way you'll get all the codes in one hit. Or you can also omit the from, 0 and page size, so you don't have to specify those. And then there's a filter, and the filter is specifically in elastic format. And those of you who don't know what elastic is, this is more or less what it looks like. I'll give you this, forget about all the gobbledygook. Probably what all of you or any of you who request this may want to edit is the specification, what specification, D-Spec or W-Spec, and the code list, specific code list that you want to request for. And you can also leave those out. You can actually cut some of those lines out if you want to have everything. But we'll give you a bit of a document to help in terms of that. And I've decided that I'm going to take a risky approach. I want to actually show you that in operation. Where is that example? So if I was to paste that URL, you can see it's the same URL. All of that's the same. If I paste that into a browser, you'll get a bit of information. Now, I'm using Firefox. And normally people will get the raw data, and this is what it would look like. But if you use something like Firefox or some browser that gives you the ability to dissect this a little bit, or to interpret that, then you can get the data to look like this. So there's the code list, there's a code, and there's a description, and so forth. And so you can actually, a human can read the stuff and can look at that. Most of the times, I'm assuming that people would want to use the code list in an automated process, and so we use something like FME to do that. All right, enough of that. Talk about BIM integration very quickly. George has mentioned before. Everybody knows that BIM is the biggest, is a big word at the moment, or is being bandied around a lot. And BIM is an important aspect of asset management. Gives you a methodology with which you can manage the life cycle of an asset. One of our statements is that you cannot manage infrastructure if you don't have good data, and that's why you should use something like A-SPEC in order to have the good data and to integrate the good data disciplines. The problem is that, not the problem, but a lot of times people will get the good data and they'll just bring the data into a staging database. So that's just a database that sits in front of the data, your actual corporate database, and that's where it stays. And people will then use the GIS and the asset management system to extract data from the A-SPEC data and to populate the GIS and the asset management system. We say that actually your A-SPEC could play a much more important role within the organization, because it's the glue that can bring these things together, these corporate management systems. And so what we've done is we've built a little proof of concept to integrate an asset management system with Revit, which is a BIM tool. And we collaborated there with Education Horizons. Here's the little process. What you have to do in terms of this is you always have to build the asset classes prior to actually building sorry, I'm saying asset classes. You have to build a list of all the shared parameters. Well, that's a complete list of all the assets, all the attributes that you want to use across all the assets. And so we build a little bit of we've set up a script with which we create that. And we're extracting the data from the A-SPEC spreadsheets, extracting them, building the shared parameter files, and then within Revit, our script will put them together and build separate asset classes. Once you've got the separate asset classes, there's still no data in them, and what you have to do is you've got to now you've got to do a mapping really between the asset class and the shared parameter files, and we've automated that process as well, so that at the end of all of that, what we have is a set of attributes that live outside of both the Revit model, but inside a database, or an Excel spreadsheet, but that could be linked to the Revit model. It could be linked to your GIS. And so in other words, you can make changes in the one, and those changes be reflected through the automated scripting into your BIM models, and therefore provide a form of integration between them.
4 minutes, Gaby.
4 minutes. All right. I want to quickly talk about GDV Hub. What we've done in GDV Hub is it's still there. We're still doing the GDV Hub validations, but we've also added a validation and auto correction process. And here's just a very quick video that runs through. And I will probably have to hurry that up if I only have 4 minutes, George. What we do here is loading a data set. There's your zip file going in with the data set. It gets uploaded. When you click continue, it extracts the data, maps it to what it needs to be mapped against A-SPEC, and it shows you on the left-hand side all the available classes, but you can swap sides. So those are all the classes that you've submitted and what they are mapped against. Now, some of them have already mapped, and that's the ones where the names were 100% the same, but not all of them were mapped. And the tool allows you to map them. But you'll also see on the left-hand side that HE Walls hasn't got everything mapped. It hasn't got the green tick, and that's because not all of the fields were mapped. And so what the tool now allows you to do is to go and select those unmapped fields, and you can go and map them. And we just change some of the attributes just to show. And once you've done the mapping, you can continue, and you are then able to go and save that mapping. So if you work in a particular way in your organization, you can set it up once and then come back and submit multiple times, and it'll just use the same mapping, and you don't have to go through all of that. And when you actually do the validation, it will now go and run through and do auto correction of all of the issues that it can automatically correct. And when that's done, you can download your data, the corrected data, or you can generate a report, and we and review the reports. And I think, George, at that point, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Gaby. It was great, as always. I'll just share my screen. Alrighty. So the wrap up. Let's start talking about things. So what we're gonna, some things I'll talk about on this slide, other things I've got some other slides, but
George, can I interrupt there just really quickly?
Yep.
I have a couple more polls that I wanted to launch. The one I just did now is the API code list poll. So if you're interested in signing up and getting moving on that, just put yes and submit that. It will automatically record your contact details, and Gaby will be in touch with you to sort that out. So please answer that poll. The other one is the GDV Hub. Again, if you're interested in that, just select yes, and somebody from the GDV Hub team will be in contact around setting you up on that, or answering more questions if you have more questions. So if you could please answer that poll, that would be great. And a couple more, one more thing. We are looking at putting together a community platform where you can A-SPEC users and consultants can share experiences and exchange information and basically have casual conversations about specs. And if you're interested in being a part of that, or would like to find out when we launch that, then please, again, same process, select yes if it's something you're interested in, and we'll contact you when that's up and running. Thanks, George.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. No problem. Alrighty, so future proofing. I'm going to talk a little bit about that after in just a moment. Proposed release dates. We're proposing that all of the updated documents are published in January. Now, given that we asked you about a phase-in period for new releases, the poll today, I just saw the results, 92% were in favour of a 6-month period, and I can confirm that overwhelmingly the request has been for a 6-month period for phase-in. So what that will mean is that from the time that the specs are published, there will be a 6-month phase-in. So if they are published in January, then they will be applicable from 1st of July onwards. Code lists, Gaby just gave you a really great example of what's involved, and also if you're tech-minded, what you could access to do some of your filtering and the like. Don't hesitate to tap him on the shoulder for more information. So by attending any of the forums, we've previously said that accessing the code list will be free. This is a Digital Hive product, and this is something that we have negotiated with Digital Hive. And following that, there will be a nominal cost of $215 plus GST per annum for your organisation to access them. It's not per person. The subscribers to the specs will have this included in their next renewal. So if your renewal is not due until July next year, then you're going to get to play for free until July next year. We spoke briefly about, well, actually we didn't talk about classifications this time, but related to Revit, we know that there are many classifications that are used. IFCs, Omniclass, Uniclass. How A-SPEC fits in, as Gaby showed you, is it's an extract of the details that are held in the Revit drawing to populate the A-SPEC requirements that can then be used by the asset owners. Out of last week's forum, we had a question related to the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy, and if A-SPEC has been mapped to the concepts of exchange information requirements and the asset information requirements. The answer to that is no, but we have now started investigating what that would involve. Accessing documents from the website, I've demonstrated that during the seminar. If you want any more information, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so this is my contribution to future proofing. Recently, through one of the industry magazines, I saw this article about the value of public sector data, so I clicked on it. And what I'm going to do for people that are interested in this, I'm going to put that in the chat so you can access the article. I think it's a really great article because this is something that we've been advocating for a very long time. And just a minute. Okay, it's now posted up there. And I think I first saw this in New Zealand close to 10 years ago, how they valued the public sector data, particularly asset data. Now, there's a number of case studies, and if we have a look at the case studies, there's 4 case studies. Right, and I'll let you have a look at each of those. If you want to access it through the link, go right ahead. Now, the one I want to, and I apologize for the quality of this picture, but the one I want to focus a little bit on is the value of public sector data in relation to NUAR. This case study is around developing a national underground asset register. And we've actually have the opportunity next week at the showcase of hearing more about this from One Spatial, who are the lead consultants on this project. I thought it was a really great opportunity to have a look at what's happening internationally around consolidation of effort around data sets. And among other things that you'll hear about the approach is how they've tackled dealing with standardizing 650 plus asset owners data sets. No mean feat, and how they, and one of the other things that I saw through when I attended the Locate conference when Andrew Bashfield was presenting was how they're incorporating AI into identifying where leaks may occur. Now, the other things that I read about this initiative is that there's 3 use cases that are driving this initiative. The first one is about safe digging and utility strike savings. No doubt we've had our fair share of utility strikes, and the intention of Dial Before You Dig is to address that. However, this goes to the next level. It's not just about providing a set of maps. This is about providing access to a unified data set that is going to benefit asset owners, excavators, the general public, and business. It's also one of the use cases driving it is on-site efficiency and project savings, and listing benefits to planners and excavators. And then finally, the third one is back office and data exchange savings. We can't underestimate the value of that. And again, benefiting planners and data managers. I thought it was really important to state that, and given how we're going to have this conversation, it's a really valuable topic, and I hope that you'll all come along and just tell everyone how excited you are to attend to find out about the value of public sector data, and have all your friends and family come as well. Wouldn't that be cool? I know the response I'm going to get from my wife. She's going to be busy. Anyway, that aside, I'm not going to take it personally. So let's move on. So the next forum is the showcase. Now, before I talk about that, as you can see, we've ticked we've ticked the all the forums that we've gone through. We've now had 6 forums in 6 weeks, and it's by no means a mean feat to do that. It's been quite good. We've been adopting new platforms, new processes. You would have seen a difference with our polling and the like. And, thanks to Kelly Ireland and our team of Kim Hesse and Natalie Northey, who are, well, Kim and Natalie are behind the scenes, and you probably engage with Natalie when you send in requests for access. But as you know, Kelly's not a shrinking violet, and she lets us know what needs to be done, and really thankful for that, Kelly. So we've got some, just before we finish up in the last couple of minutes, we've got some polls that we want to run. So Kelly, can you please take us through the final polls just to wrap up this session, please?
I can. So this poll is really just for our information around relevancy of the forums. So, you know, rate it 1 to 5, 5 being very relevant, so that we can, you know, use stuff that you want. And George,
Yes.
you asked me to create a poll for people to list their role or profession.
Yep.
But they do list that when they register.
Oh, okay. No problem.
So,
Don't worry about that, Kelly.
You know, it might just be annoying.
Thank you for being straight up.
Yeah, that's okay. And look, I'm working madly on getting some cool speakers for the forum. So if you have suggestions for anyone, send them through. But aside from the underground asset thing that George has spoke about, I was listening attentively. I've just been speaking with Catherine Williams, who is part of the Digital Twin Partnership newly formed committee, and I think she's probably going to represent for us. So there'll be lots of stuff, and I'm really trying to think outside the square. I'm looking at a cybersecurity kind of data governance thing with the breach of Optus cybersecurity. I'm now thinking maybe we need to be talking about data governance and the role it plays in supporting and implementing some better cybersecurity, because I think that's what it comes down to, right? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I doubt it. So yeah, I've got a few things on the plate that I'm throwing around. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn, and we'll start announcing our speakers. And you know, you'll get no doubt from Natalie some sort of EDM once it's all, you know, as they come on board as well. So bring a friend, make sure you're registered, help us promote it on LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn if you're not already, and please share our posts to help us get the message out there, because we really are getting a huge following at the moment in terms of registrations, and already we have over 88 as of yesterday. There's probably more now registered for the showcase. And you know, when we first did the showcase, I think we had like 60 people, George. And we haven't even announced all the speakers yet. So it's really, you know, people are very interested in listening to what we've got to say. So don't be afraid to bring a friend, and I'll see you all next week.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And so you'll be sending in, well, our team will be sending information out about the run sheet and what to expect. And we'll be profiling our speakers. Andre, am I right in saying that One Spatial is the lead contractor for the NUR project?
No.
Okay.
You're not right. Atkins.
I was just elevating you, was I?
Yeah, you were. Thank you for the elevation, but that's not the reality. The NUR project is a consortium of 3 organisations. Atkins Engineering is the lead, and then One Spatial and Ordnance Surveys are the other 2 in the consortia. So Andrew will go through that in more detail next week. So I won't steal his thunder.
Right.
But thank you for the elevation, but no, we're not the lead.
Not to worry. Okay. So on with the showcase. Thank you, everybody. We seem to have managed to be bang on 12 o'clock again. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Thank you, Kylie, for your welcome to country and your personal approach to it. Really appreciated it. If you're at the showcase next week, would you like to do it again?
Sure, I can do it again. Okay,
great. So we know that Kylie's going to be at the showcase next week.
I've lost my job, Kylie.
No, that's all I'm doing. Go out after that.
Yes. So thank you again. Thanks for the time that you've made. And we'll be here for another 15 minutes till 12:15. And look forward to seeing you all. Nice to see you again, Kim and everybody. I won't mention everyone, but I think our numbers across all of the specs have been up, and I'll be talking about that at the showcase.